Hello once again, dear viewers. You're watching ERi-TV. Welcome to this special edition of Open Mic with our guest for this evening, Ambesaggir Berhe. He is a filmmaker and an assistant professor at the Howard University, Washington, D.C. Welcome to our program, Ambesaggir.
Thank you.
All right.
For having me.
Okay. So, and our subject for this evening is going to be about cinemas. But before we delve into it, the perspective that you have now, I just want to put it in relation to the African reality, because we, after all, are part of Africa. So, in that context, what would you say?
Well,
where are we there?
As
Where do we
in
stand?
cinema,
Yeah.
well, there's several parts. A lot of African countries are there telling their story, but telling their story in a very, with whatever they have. So, and then most of it, it's actually a local thing. They tell their story, but to a local people. So it doesn't travel outside the countries, regardless of whatever country. There's few countries that are coming up, like Nigeria has now a little bit coming out, but it's still, the production method is a very consumption, very local oriented. And so, and then it's also, it's different from region to region and country to country. But the biggest challenge is movies that are produced here in Africa, they're not traveling out. Now, at the same time, movies or films that are produced in Europe, Asia, and North America are coming all to our houses through our TV, through our whatever digital method you use. So the consumption level is unbalanced. We get a lot of their stuff, they get none of our stuff. We got our stuff, but here's local. So here's the imbalance, which I don't like. The imbalance is like, okay, if I'm gonna consume your story, like my story also has to come out. And then you consume it. There's the playing level is not, not equal level. One, it has to do with us not understanding the cinematic language. So we tell, because we come traditionally, a lot of African country, I can't generalize all, but at least in Eritrea, we come from oral tradition, which is we told our story orally. So we told it not visually in a way that is cinematic. Now, at the same time, orally actually is also visual, because in order to explain something, you have to picture it. You have to picture it and you have to structure it. So the problem now in Africa in general is the transition from oral traditional storytelling to cinema is interrupted. Because instead of developing the oral tradition cinema or the oral tradition storytelling into cinematic language, we bypassed that and we copied the Eurocentric storytelling and try to fit it to our storytelling in the cinema. Now, there's several problems with that. One is you can't fit our story into a very structured or a story way of telling that is developed for a different reason. And so because of that, there is a gap. And so that gap, to close that gap, is you have to go back, understand your oral tradition of storytelling, which is a very sophisticated way of storytelling, because those people who did that for centuries, they have a method. And that method, it came year after year after year, century after century, and it has its own way of doing it. We bypassed that, and then we went and then used something else to tell our story. And so what happened is the originality and then the way of storytelling, the way we're supposed to do it, didn't come correct. It came as a copy. So because of that, a lot of African films, or again, films that are produced for the local area, don't really go outside, and because it really doesn't have that uniqueness of a very specific way of communicating the story. Now, the challenge for now, even for me and for other, a lot of African filmmakers, which like Osman Zemben, Haile Gerima, or those are like the forefront. But there's others are following now. They're challenging by saying, okay, I'm going to go back and then use my method, my country's method, my Iler method, and then transfer it into cinematic. And successfully they did, except their films, are rarely seen. they're marginalized, or they're not in the mainstream, but they're still at the forefront of challenging that and doing African cinema in the way it's supposed to be. And I come from that school of thought where you really have to understand what you're doing. Not only that, you also really have to challenge the conventional method and then use your own method, but also understand the cinematic language and then imply it by that. Because, like I said at the beginning, humans, we have the same emotional methods of communication. And then so if we're going to connect with the world, we really have to understand cinema and then understand our culture and then meet it, that, and then combine those two to actually tell a powerful story. Now, to your question, where is the state of Africa right now in terms of film? Is this, there's a lot of consumption, there's a lot of production going on, but most of it, it's not properly geared into the cinematic language. It's like a very dialogue-oriented, very, misdirected in that sense. So the challenge is now, how do you bring it back and then just go back to like a traditional cinematic way of telling a story, and then apply your story, apply your culture, apply your tradition, apply your reality. And so then, once you do it properly, that will take care of it in terms of who's going to see it, where it's going to be seeing, and so on.
Mm-hmm. Ambesaggir, now my question is, there is a balance that we need to maintain, literally, as you've said, instead of flooding westernized cinemas and movies in all our African countries, literally. How do we keep that balance? How do we keep that? What's the best approach, would you say?
When I say balance, I'm not saying let's cut it off, let's not see. In general, I'm just saying the balance, because even like the youth, for example, what do they watch? I mean, I look at them, I ask them, they watch mostly current films because they understand the communication method. They understand the cinematic language. They don't even have to understand the languages. Either it's English, French, or whatever language the film is originated. But they understand the visual aspect of it, because first, most of them grew up with it, and second, those methods are normal in the film industry. The methods of using visual to tell your story. And so the imbalance comes from us, from here, not producing equivalent types of stories and equivalent types of communication. Now, I'm not talking about the story. The story, every story has its own merit. I'm talking about communicating the story visually. And so when you communicate visually to a visually sophisticated kid here in Africa now, with the social network and so on, they're very sophisticated. So they look at our films here and they don't want to see it because it's beyond them. It's like they bypassed it. The movies, they treat them like dumb because they feed them everything in dialogue, in a matter of just basically to instead of challenging the viewer, instead of making the viewer actually work and participate in the story, they just give them everything, like spoon feed them. And so that's the challenge. That's one of the reasons that we are flooded by other films, not by our own, because we're not up to par in the challenge. Now, the reason for it is so many things. One of it is economy. You can't produce as fast and as much as those films that come to us. But the image, the cinematic language is the same. We can produce with less as equal impact. Might not be a big budget, mega film, but it will be a powerful cinematic language that has very powerful story with a very specific way of doing it. There's films like that. There's been done so many times. We all went through them, and it could be done. But it's what's lacking right now is the way we communicate with our audience. So that's the reason, the imbalance, I see one. But in terms of there's a distribution issue. There is an actual budget issue. And then the main one also, the education issue. When I say education, say film education issue. Most of filmmakers in Africa, they got their knowledge by just scrambling, by just doing it again and again and again. And just by, most of them are self-taught. And then self-taught could get you so much because this is not an individual field. This is a group field. So you have to have several people working with you in order to master something. And so in that, and then I think there's that gap. I used to think, well, you know, African films are like, this is when I was a student, filmmaker or student. I was like, oh, African films, you know, are not improving, da 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 da. But I never like understood that the key fact to it is the resource of education, the resource of knowledge, or like what's film, how film operates, how do we do it? How do we do it with money? How do we do it without money? How do we do it when we have little money? How do we do it with this much people? How do we do it with this little people? All those necessary information were not available. So now I understand it. Now I see it. I see it. The lack of the key problem is that education. And so, and I think for me, even coming back here, sharing my education, sharing the thing that I gained throughout the years from, you know, different mentors and filmmakers and artists, is the understanding of we need to actually go back and study it. We need to really, really understand this thing in order for us to use it properly and then use it in a way that actually helps us very effectively. Okay. So that was the workshop, and the result was very good because at least from last year, this year, I was happy with the result because I saw student communicating through cinematic language, through visual image, and I can show you a couple of them. And so even like with a lot of problems within the film, they're actually, you can see it. So I'll show you one. And so it's about, this one is actually 5 minutes. So they're short. So we told them to do short films because in a month you can only do so much. Yeah. So we can't do a long film. The other one is, which is a little bit more advanced in that sense. With that one, at least from the beginning, they had a visual story. Now, even clearly in here, I'm not talking about the story is good, the story is bad. I'm talking about how are they communicating their story visually. So with this group, from the get-go, the writing itself was clear in terms of writing in visual term. You know, because they bring the character does this, the other character does that, and so on and so on. So it was clear. So when they shot it, it helped them to actually engage us with the storyline. So this story is about two working men, well, two men, let's say. One is educated, but also, like all we do here, he's also, he has a regular job, but not enough. So to add more money, he also works as a day laborer. So that's like his life against, wishes of his wife and his society, because he's educated. He was supposed to be only in the office, but he's like, it's not enough, I need more money. So he went in his free time, works with his kid. And then you have another one who's, a strong man who's actually acting like a blind man and then begging. And so it's the story about those two men, and they run into each other. Yeah, so because they're, the other guy is working as a day laborer in the same street, and then the other guy is begging in the same street. And then they each have kids, so the kids are the point of view of the story. So the girl, of course, learns from her father, and then the other kid, he's interacting with her. And so the story is told through visually, through where they go. Now, it didn't become okay this way, so there was a lot of visual problems that they shot, and then they brought it, and then I asked them to change it because there was so many a way of shooting that the habits of like overexposing, overlighting everything in all our cinema, like everything is like just bright. And so that was the problem with this story, but they went back and reshot a lot of scenes and to make it balanced. And then they did a lot of color correction. But what I liked about this story is the two-man story, they don't have to say anything. It's just clear. Who are they and what happens within the story? It's very clear because it's just done in a way that tells shot after shot after shot. And then at the end, the accumulation of that gives us the result of the story. I think this is why I like this workshop for me and for my colleagues, where at least a little success. Now, it's not like we change everything. No, we just give a basic and say this is how you do it. Some followed, some still struggling, because the old way of working is still exists, and that's actually the way they do it. But in order for us to communicate visually with the world, we really have to understand how the world communicate with us. So it's a give and take kind of situation. So cinema is like not one country's property. Cinema is the world's property. And the way we communicate through cinema, we can communicate with each country, because stories are usually universal. But how we put them out there, it's unique for every country, for every culture, for every person, for every individual. So that's basically what the whole thing is. I don't know if I answered or talked too much.
All right, Ambas, now, with the clips that you've shown us here and the explanations, the commentary you've made about them, which is quite interesting, do you believe the ones you've been training, will they be able to tell Eritrea's story through cinema?
Yes.
This is a fine example, actually. So are you confident that they will bring this to light?
Not with this workshop only, because you have to understand. Because, like I say, even for me, it took a very long years, several years, studying as a. For me, I started here. Actually, I started as a literature. I was taught, as a teenager through the youth organization here, and then when I went to America for school, and then in the school, it took undergrad, grad, and then teaching, and then working in the business, and several, in order for me to feel confident and start saying the way I'm saying it. So it's a long-term process, but from the get-go, I was in the right direction of tell your story cinematically, and then do not compromise. Tell it the way, your culture feels, the way your tradition works. Just go to the gut of it and then tell it properly. Do not compromise. That's actually, I have mentors, teachers who really, really challenge me in that sense. I might veer here and there, but at least that's also internal. Now, so with this student, a group of students, first, last year group, and a few of them came to this year. So the continuation was few. Most of them were new, but what I like about this year is most of them were young, in their 20s. And so they're at the beginning of their filmmaking career and so on. And so this workshop, what it did is it gave them possibility that it could be done with whatever they have if they put this work ethic, this mechanism, this education, if they study it hard. Now, if they want to do a shortcut, there's another way to do it. When I say shortcut, because there's other filmmakers who didn't even show up in our group who think they have it all, and I don't know them, and but in terms of general, they think they're right. Yeah, they might be right for the local, but in terms of I haven't seen that something going outside, and when it's like, can you communicate your film into another festival dimension, and then see they understand your story, like those two shorts I showed you. You don't even need subtitle. You just showed people understand what those characters are going through. And so the challenge that we put on them is, how do you do that? How can you do that? And so most of them understood the concept. But until they train, this is not going to happen.
Obviously.
Just by just me saying it or doing workshop, it's not going to happen. The way it happens is, like this one, when you do film and you make something and then you see it, either it's going to work or it's not going to work. Until you do that, it's just going to be in your head. And for me, the way I arrived here is I made several films. Short. Some of them haven't even seen the daylight because they were terrible. But I had to go through those terrible to get to the better one. And so the challenge for the student here was, you have to make several short films. The good example, the example that I give is like, for example, internationally, who is representing us? Athletes now. Where do they come from? Are they just naturally gifted and then they just start, running or cycling? No. What we don't know or what we don't recognize is they've been grinding for years before they got into the international level. And so, and who are we just to jump in and go to international level without grinding? When I say grinding, means where is the practice? Where did you make your films? Did you make several short films? Or if you make one long film, did you make it the way it was supposed to? So like we have Zara, for example, and then the cyclists, several of them now. When they started, where were they? Were they stars from the beginning? Were they like really that fast? No. They might have had the talent, but they had to train and do so many sweating to get there. So my challenge for every filmmaker, that especially the student who came with me, is where is your training? So this is part of the training. And how much you train will dictate how much successful we'll be as a country, as a filmmakers. So once we get there, but if we just want to all go make a film and then trying to be accepted, it's not going to work, because where is the training? And this is part of it. The students' effort on their own is part of it. In collaboration, when they work in collaboration, is actually more power. And at the same time also, film in this country, especially now, is mistreated, the general cinema, because our cinemas, for example, in every city, there's one cinema, but where is our local films? We don't show our local films. What do we show? Soccer games. Now, the soccer games, it's not just soccer games just came and took over, no. Because there's no film to show our films, there is soccer games being shown in all the cinemas. Like I can tell you, like all the cinemas in Nasmara, all the cinemas that I grew up, all the cinemas that I went, got influenced. Now there's no film. I mean, there is some American film, whatever, but where is our local films? If we're gonna, grow our local film, there also has to be initiation from within the government, within the organization, within everything. Because without supporting it, the art, you can't just say grow art. No, it's a collaboration thing. First, it's like let's master our techniques, our cinema, and then at the same time also, where do we show it is also another challenge now. Most of us, we're just throwing it into YouTube. YouTube is like a pitfall that it goes there, but it doesn't really come out.
Exactly.
So, but I know the cinema is, really, is in a promising stage, because at least there's a thought of school now. We're just saying, okay, this is how we do it. How much success? I have a good, very optimistic way of understanding it. I have a good hope, but it depends on the student, how much they do, how much they make, how much they practice and produce. It's just all kind of combinational.
All right. So, Ambesaggir, now we are actually running out of time.
I know.
But if you have any final words to...
Well, I think my final word would be, I think for me, the way the workshop happened is it happened an accident. It means I didn't come to do a workshop. I mean, I do it other places. I do workshops with other filmmakers. Specifically one I did in Egypt with my teacher there from Washington, D.C. We went to Egypt and did. So for me, that was the beginning of connecting with African students, because that workshop, when I did it for 4 years, I was as an editor only. And so, but what it gave me is, it gave me the understanding of I have to contribute in a way that whatever that I know in America, in Washington, D.C., where I live, where I work, where I practice my field, I have choices. In a lot of African countries, those choices are very limited to none. And so what I understood is what I gain need to share it. I do need to share it. I do need to kind of share it and give back. So there's a lot of other artists, Eritrean artists or African artists in any capacity that wants to share their knowledge or their expertise, but don't know how. And so for me, this is an opportunity to actually not even challenge, but more like invite them. There's a way. And the way is like, how much do you want to share? If you want to share so much, there's always a way to do it. So for us, it's been the second year, very successful, of sharing and doing the workshop in a very intense way. And on the third one, I hope we get more people from our profession. Eritrean, non-Eritrean, doesn't matter, as long as they have that need to share their profession. And so I think that's the last word of it.
All right. We thank you for your time, Ambesaggir. Dear viewers, that was Ambesaggir Berhe, a filmmaker and assistant professor at the Howard University in Washington, D.C. And he has been sharing with us his experiences in cinematography, in cinemas in general, and how best we tell our story to the world outside. All right.
Thank you.
It is
I hope I
good
made
night.
sense. So
It is good night from us.